could join me again today. I want to make today a little bit more personal in the sense of to tell you more about how God has worked in my life. I'm a little further down the road now than I used to be. And so when I look back, I can see my life in decades. From the time I was born till 10 years old, I was just a little kid on a farm, had a happy life, played with the cats and dogs and rode horses, just had a wonderful child life out on the farm. And then from 11 to about 17, I was a teenager, learning to play the piano and to drive, and I had no idea what I would be in life. I wanted to do different things, but I was just a kid from Southwest Missouri, and really I was thinking about the only thing that my friends were doing. They either were going to go into teaching, so they were going to go to college and be a teacher, or they got married, because back then there wasn't a lot of choices down in Southwest Missouri. So I was one of those that got married. I was married at 17. So from 17 to 30, I had 5 kids. I got saved. I learned about missions. I felt God's call and went to Bible college, did deputation, and arrived to celebrate my 28th birthday on the field. It's rather a whirlwind bit of time, but the Lord carried me through. And then from 30 to 40, I raised my family. I worked and served here on the field along with my husband, and I tried to figure out what life was all about. And I found that most women come to their 30s, somewhere in their 30s, and they begin to take a deep look at where they are. And most of them find it hard to grasp that their youth is passing, or they think their youth is passing. They think they're getting old. And I actually cut my hair into a grandma cut when I was 30 because I believed I was old then. But I also went through a 3 to 4 year depression because I just could not figure out what was going on. I wasn't unhappy on the mission field. I wasn't pining for home. I just didn't know where I was or who I was. And things weren't coming out the way I thought they would. I cried and cried and prayed and hoped, and the only thing that prevailed was darkness. And I clung to Job's words, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." And I waited for God to rescue me. And if you wanted to read more about my depression, it's in my book, Build That Wall. But the break came when I faced the fact that I was disappointed, maybe even a little bit angry, that missions didn't seem to be what I'd imagined. It just didn't come out the way the books said it would. Nothing was really wrong. I was just trying to control everything, and nothing was cooperating. Not my husband, not my children, and especially not my thinking. And I learned so much through that depression, things I could never have learned any other way. So while it was a very rough decade, I'm very thankful for it as well. Then between my 40s and my 50s, the kids began to leave home, and I began online studies, and I gained my bachelor's in women's studies and my master's in biblical counseling. And these two things were God's tools to repair my heart after my depression and equip me for further ministry. And at 48, I became a grandmother. Our church was growing. I was hosting pastors' wives retreats and ladies' retreats, and my ministry was expanding, and I was growing and happy serving the Lord. Then I came to 50 and 60, and of course in 50, my life began to change, and also the Bible college dropped into my lap. I became the registrar and added that to my list of very many ministries. I really enjoy working with young adults. They just light up my life. But it was not easy to take this on because I'm not a trained teacher. I can administrate, I can hold things together for a while, but I'm not a teacher in any way when it comes to school things. So I had to remember that God was the one that had to take this ministry, and he did. He's always taken care of the college ministry. In my 60s then, I kept up all these ministries, and then the Lord opened the door for me to do one of the things my heart had always desired, and that was to write. I had lots of time in COVID to write. I don't consider myself to be a great writer, but I do love pouring my heart out on paper. And then last fall, I turned 70, and I'm already praying about what's in my next decade, and I'm excited to see what God has planned. So I wanted to also share with you one other thing that has been a guiding thing through our life here on the field. And it happened back in 1995. My depression had passed. The church was organized and they'd purchased a building. They were on a long we were on a long furlough at a missions conference. A missionary from Australia was showing his slides, and his people had put together his presentation. They were very proud of their missionary and the things that he had done. He had been there a long time, over 25 years, and he'd organized the other missionaries into a fellowship. He'd started a Bible college, and he'd planted over 25 churches in Australia. That was an amazing thing. And I sat watching his presentation, and I heard a whisper in my ear, as clear as a bell. God was saying, "Gail, do you believe I could do the same thing in England?" Well, I had to gasp, because England's not a fast place for the gospel and things like that to happen. But I remember saying, "Yes, Lord, I believe you can do it. I don't know how you would, but I believe that you can." And so from then on, I just began watching to see how God would make this challenge come true. I wasn't a pastor. I couldn't start churches or even start a Bible college, and I had no power to organize men. But before we got home from that furlough, the Bible college, which had closed in 1985, reopened in our new building. So when we got home, we were immediately involved in teaching at the college. My ears were up. And then in 1997, God sent a new missionary to work with us, and he and about 14 of our people went over to Cannock to open Hilltop Baptist Church. So God was working, and I was watching. And then in 2003, the missionaries got together and organized as a charity, and I stood amazed. The charity was started because the pastors had a youth camp and now the Bible college, and they needed, for financial and administrative reasons, to have a charity for the government. And God was at work still. There we have a Bible college, there we have 2 churches now, and we've got the missionaries organized into a fellowship. But I did not know how he was going to plant 25 churches. We only had 2. And I told God I didn't know if I'd live long enough to see 25 churches planted at this slow type of a rate. Then in 2008 rolled around, and God opened the door for our church to become involved with the UK immigration and sponsoring missionaries into the UK. And Tom and I really enjoyed this ministry. It was such a blessing to work with young missionaries, to help them find their feet, but just to watch and see God working in their lives. And today, I can tell you that there are over 25 churches that through that ministry, we have had a part in planting or reviving. And back in 2014, we even started another work in Telford. So in 2023, God closed that door to the missionary sponsorship ministry. His work was complete. He'd met the goal that he challenged me to believe back in 95. There was an organized fellowship of missionaries. The college now had its own premises even, and there were over 25 churches planted. And God said he would do it, and he did. And these things don't happen. You don't get to see these things happen without a long-term outlook. And they don't happen without God being the one that gives the increase. Tom and I are now working on finishing well. We've already handed the leadership of the college over to a younger missionary. We've turned the leadership of our first church over to a British pastor, and we're watching now to see what God has for our next decade. His word promises that we will be fat and flourishing in our old age. I'm not so keen on the fat part, but I'm all in for the flourishing. I tell you this today to encourage you to go back and look at the decades of your life. Look and see where God has been at work, where he's prepared or moved you into exactly the right place. And I think you will find him in every decade, and his work will continue until the day of Jesus Christ, right? So keep going. God isn't finished yet. He still has time to give you the desires of your heart if you'll just stay faithful and follow him. I'll see you next week.